Boom. And we're live. There we go. What's the second time? Hello, welcome everybody to the Wide World of Warhammer. With us today, we've got an old veteran of the Queensland community, but someone I have so much admiration and love for is Simon Gojkovic. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic, mate.
I did ask before the show, was that the correct enunciation of your last name? Or is it Gojkovic, or is it?
You call me whatever you want, but it's Gojkovic. But J is
Gojkovic.
Yeah.
J is why. There you go. So
it's from grade 1, since I was 5-6 years old, I've been known as Simon. Like, my actual name is Simo.
Okay, fair.
Most Aussies go Simo, and it's like, just call me Simon.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There we go. That's what we do every day. So Simon's here today. So someone who's been part of the Australian team for a very, very long time, and talk about practice and like the old Allen Iverson quote from basketball. We're talking about practice, but it's actually relevant in the 40K community. And Simon's someone who, as I mentioned before, I have great admiration and respect for, because he takes his practice deliberately and seriously, and is someone who has established a routine of practices and bringing out players. So, but before you dive into this, I've been talking a lot. Simon, for people who've never heard of you, how long have you been in the game for, and then when have people heard of you, your accomplishments and stuff?
So I started when I was 16, so 26 years, if you can do the maths there, how old I am right now. And I've taken bits and breaks occasionally, but always kind of been following the game. White Dwarfs pretty much every year while they were a thing. And I mean, the most visible accomplishment that people who didn't know who I was in the last maybe 12 years, where I've been really getting back into the competitive scene, was part of the 2022 win that we did last year. I've done ETC or WTC 3 times. I captained the second time I went in 2016. I've been part of, or the captain of, the Queensland team for 8 times, I think. Yeah. Won 6 of them, which is always a good thing that we're going to remind the other Australians about. And some of the other things that I have done, and again, I haven't been just a one-man band, but it's something that I have definitely kicked off or pushed a lot, was, in my mind, like the professionalism of 40K in Australia, especially like on that global scale. And as I said, I haven't been the only one. Like, Diffie definitely started elements of it, but I brought up that TC FAQ that was based primarily off the WTC FAQ and then the ITC one. This was, I don't know, 7 years ago. Bringing that in, saying we need to all be playing the same game, not going tournament to tournament. Here in Brisbane, I remember going down to the Gold Coast and then up to a Brisbane event and playing a completely different game because of house rules and stuff like that. And I was like, no, we can't do this. If we actually want to go overseas and pretend we're actually playing 40K, we all have to be playing the same game. I kicked that off, getting the committee groups together to actually get some agreement across, here and as well as New Zealand. And yeah, in like 2016, when I was captain of the, 2018, when I was the captain of the Australian team, first time we brought over a coach, started doing a little bit more professionalizing of the actual organization, putting some systems in place in setting up the team. And then 2019 was the first year that we went back to back, which was really fantastic. We did handovers and things like that. So while I've done a lot in my mind in the game itself, and I've won events here and there from a singles point of view as well, I've taken the kind of systematic approach to up our game in essence. And so while I haven't necessarily been the only one doing it, as I said, I am one of a few within Australia who really pushes some of these things. I have been part of the early stages of, I think, most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And people will pay massive respect. So, like, feel free to give yourself a pat on the back, Simon. It's okay to take a bit of respect for yourself, or some of the laying the foundations and the, I guess, framework for what Australian and New Zealand 40K to an extent has also built itself upon, with the ANZ TC being the Australian New Zealand team champs, and then we're just referring to as well, like the Brisbane to Gold Coast, like being like completely different matters. They're like an hour and a half away. So for people who don't know the Brisbane, Queensland, sorry, geography, that's like how close it was back in the day. So yeah, someone who's laid a lot of foundation. So you were part of the Australian WTC winning team last year, won multiple and a team champs with Team Queensland. So it's like a state representative team champs, for people who aren't aware. And yeah, so laid the foundations for professional 40K. So I guess the quick conversation we want to talk about tonight, though, is the practice and sort of like the behind the scenes things. It's all great to going to a tournament and winning these events, but those things wouldn't happen without, I imagine, practice in the background. So I guess a very blatant question off the bat: how much do you attribute your success on the tabletop, and I guess the team success, to this behind the scenes prep? Is it like the most important thing, or is it an adjunct thing to skill and like good lists, or what?
I mean, it's a great question. I know that's the topic of the thing, but the twist that you put in, it's I hadn't really thought about.
Sure,
it.
no, it's okay.
If this is no, I'm going to get to it. I'm giving you a compliment. It's the how important is it to the overall thing. To me, one of the biggest drivers is the growth mindset. And I've talked about this in different podcasts that I've done, or even that training stuff that I did a couple of years ago. Having a growth mindset and growing as a person is probably the biggest driver of your own improvement. Being able to be very, what's the word? When you're thinking of a lot, introspective, like very introspective, being honest with yourself and open to ideas from others and actual feedback is probably the biggest. It's not just practice, because people can put in, I've seen and I've played with, game after game, hour after hour, and not improve. And there's something there. It's not just about how much hard work. Otherwise, we'd all be millionaires. It's so the growth mindset, I think, is the most. Then there's some stuff, and again, if you want to go onto my old YouTube channel, that's Godhammer Gaming. I did a whole series, and in fact, a training thing that's called Thinking to Win, which is when you're actually on, at the moment of playing the game. It's about giving yourself as much space to think, and some time, like both space and time to think, so that you can actually think about the situation on the board and work out what you should be doing, and not be rushed and not be flustered and all that type of stuff, right? Practice comes into that, but it's not the only thing. So again, without going over every element of that, go watch if you want. It's a couple of hours long, but it was done in 7th ed, but I think it's still relevant to this day. It's about, in essence, to win a game like 40K or chess or anything like that, you need to think, and seeing patterns, that comes from practice, and that's where we're going to get to practice.
Yeah,
practice
and I'll link that.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
So go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, no, sorry. And practice is probably the third element of that. You've got practice, which gives you space to thinking. Practice also gives you the data, in essence, that you can then get to grow. Like without practice, you can't grow. Unless you're like a yogi sitting in a cave, just humming to yourself. So I think all three of those elements work. It's like you need to be able to have a growth mindset. You need to have practice so you get data that feeds into growing as a player. But also it doesn't matter how practiced you are. If you're just stressed and you're thinking about something else and you're not paying attention, you can lose games. Like I know I have stuffed up tons of times because I was thinking about something else, or I had a phone call and so I wasn't paying attention, and you make a mistake, etc. I think those are the three big elements. Yeah, and I can go more into, and we will. I know some of the questions that we're going to be covering, but the practice element, I think I need to lay out that it's like the practice is one of those three, and it feeds into those, because the more you practice, the more patterns you can see, so the more time you get. But the more practice you're getting, the more you can feed into as data to. I think I lagged out a little bit. You're on mute, mate.
But look at this, not messing up the program. It's all right. We've lost a little bit there. That's fine. I think we got the gist of things. And so Godhammer Gaming. Oh, Godhammer Gaming. Yes, call it Godhammer Gaming. Will be linked in the description below. Yes, his old YouTube channel, and as well as referring to some podcasts. So as Simon will allude to in the podcast, and for people watching, Ethos, 16 Ethos, Australian-based podcast platform. So it's a group, a community based in Queensland predominantly, but people in New South Wales and across Australia. They do some amazing content and are just getting better and better and better, which is always linked. It's also linked in the description down below and will be referred to throughout. So, and we'll share it around. So don't have to worry about it. So when you hear Simon refer to something,
we're a team of sauna enthusiasts.
Team of sauna enthusiasts. But so what we're talking about, so I mean, we're jumping the shark, or not was it jumping the shark, but jumping the queue a bit. You're part of the team. So how important is it having a team for practice, rather than being, as you said, a yogi in a cave and just going through thought patterns or playing with sticks and stones and putting out your models on the dirt, essentially?
It is important because they encourage you. People, especially if you're in a close-knit team like we are in Ethos, they know if something's up, and they, you'll always have. And we're a little bit past that. Like I describe Ethos, like we've got the Ethos, and it's all about just cooking, singing, all this top of stuff. And it's mainly Ducks painting or Nick Argent's, lunch. Usually cans of tuna and or chicken with sriracha. That's pretty much. It's like Instagram reel. It's anyway. Of course, firegrass. I have to say firegrass, otherwise I get cut out. So the actual chat itself, and the kind of group camaraderie, it's just like having a group of mates, and you're just kind of keeping each other's backs. If we actually do, and when we do play 40K, we of course, we have regular days, and we'll get into that practice there. We're quite intentional with our practice. That you can organize a game very quickly, and that practice is going to be at a very high level. And we're not like an exclusive club in that we're not allowed to talk to other people around Brisbane. And you've been over to Eric's, that there's like at any one Saturday afternoon, there's usually like 5 or 6 club reps in essence there, and it doesn't make a difference. We're just a group of mates. So the club itself is a little bit separate from the kind of 40K scene, if you know what I mean. It's more about a group of mates who have similar values that can push each other. But then the intentional practice doesn't have to be just from the club. And I encourage, and this is the beautiful thing that we've got here in Brisbane, is we've got, what was it, like 5 or 6 really strong clubs with really good players across them. But it's friendly rivalry. It's the steel sharpens steel type of idea where we're pushing each other to become better in a really collegiate way.
Yes, so who are people like as part of your team? So I know we're going a bit of a tangent, but these are people inside your team which are amazing 40K players. So just ring off the top of my head, like Eric Lethurus, Hayden Waldock, so 2 people are part of the WTC winning team. Alex Kerrison, Benny Way, ring off the Paul. Oh, sorry, ring off the last couple of people who people may know of.
Yeah, look. Last time I did this, I got this wrong, so I'm going to make sure.
It's okay.
One second. So, no. You keep talking. I want to bring up the actual list.
Yeah, sure. There you go. So we get you to bring up the actual list. And this is no I guess easy killings or easy people to play against. These are people who are top level competitors, and you bring your A game every time. And you're talking about iron sharpens iron. Yes, there's obviously that easy chatting about tuna and what you're having for lunch every day, and having some bit of banter between, but it's also 40K chat, I'm sure, sprinkled in there from time to time, which
there is. We came together because of 40K, but as I said, we're friends with, I don't know, pretty much my Facebook friends list, and you're a friend there. You can have a look in there. I use Facebook almost primarily for 40K. There's elements of friends and family, but realistically, I would say 95% of the people there are because of 40K, and I've got a couple of hundred people there. So it's just like, it's all about knowing lots of people and being able to building that kind of reputation that you can get a game at any moment, and in fact, people are seeking you out for games. And it's the same thing with me. Like, I know the people that I love playing against that are strong players, and so I'm not going to just look within my backyard. I will look around and invite people over and give them a feed and say we'll have a game. That way I don't have to go anywhere. Anyway, I'll do a quick run through. So we got Brisbane and Sydney contingent. Newcastle contingent. We may do a little bit of expanding in the future. That is a thing that probably Eric will say, shh, stop talking. But yeah, we got in Brisbane, Eric, Alex, Dan Savage, Hayden Waltuck, Nick Argent, Nick Standing, myself, Steve Wade, and Paulie. He's not in Brisbane so much. He's deep underground in Emerald, but that's okay. Then in Newcastle/Sydney, we got Ben Way, Chris Wright, Connor Keane, and Michael, Mr. Mr. Secret admirer, Michael. That's. I'll just leave it at that.
Leave it at that. Some in jokes there. So, but it's so when you talk about like this teams a bit more. So, how do you, obviously when you're playing against good players, you lose games, and how do you sort of balance that between getting practice into quality opponents and then maybe your own ego of wanting to win a game, or is that put all a step aside for the practice and testing an idea, testing a theory?
Yeah. All right. So, I'll and I'm going to probably do an actual deeper dive episode of this on my own podcast, but because a couple of people have asked about exactly this. But I go about, so I do collections in terms of my own personal kind of hobbying and all that type of stuff. And you've been over my house, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I just kind of stick to all the Aldaris and all the Tyranids, and I just build that collection. And for me, it's about mastering a number of different armies within kind of some super factions. And that way I'm not ever bored in team environments. I'll have at least one army at a minimum to be, available and good at, and I'll just kind of cycle through them. Now, my process for in general is not really focusing on singles events. It's primarily teams. It's been probably teams for about last 6-7 years, and I'll pick out what I'm going to focus on for that year, in essence, or the 6 months, depending on where I am in the year, on the big team events that I'm doing. Now, we're here in Brisbane. We're blessed again that we have reasonably regular team events with McGowan running them, and some of the others starting to do this as well, but McGowan specifically running in the Gladiator Gaming stuff. And so we've got some smaller team events that do the fill-ins that help practice for the bigger ones. ATC, of course, I've done for the last, as I said, like the 8 last ones that have happened. That's always been the big one in my calendar. And then the years that I actually do ETC or WTC, that takes priority almost over everything. And so I say to myself, all right, I'm going to start list development, in essence, for the next, say, 6 months. So I've just started that, in essence, for 10th, or as of 3-4 weeks ago with Tyranids, because I switched from the Triple Wraith Knight bullshit that I was playing to making people sad just because I was doing it for the team. Talk about that in a different podcast. But I switched from that and I said, right, I'm starting on Tyranids. The first codex coming in. I'm going to be on a 6-month journey, with the theory being that I'm on the Queensland team playing ATC next year. And that's how I kind of chunk up that journey, right? Because I'm a father of 4 kids. I work full time. I do volunteer work and stuff like that outside of, all of this. So it's like I need to be very intentional with the spare time that I have and getting, in essence, the most out of that practice that I can afford into that. And so I start the journey. And yeah, usually it's 4 to 6 months, that journey of from literal haven't played a single game with the faction to a killer list that I am 100% happy with. And I've done it now. I've done this process, yeah, the last 6 to 7 years in essence. And I've almost always been happy with it. I think the 2022 ATC down in Newcastle that I played GSC, I was happy enough with it, but it wasn't perfect. I'd identified the one that we took to WTC, like the kind of a myriad cult, etc. And I knew there was something there. And when me and Eric swapped because he was playing Tyranids, I was playing GSC. When we swapped, I told him I think there's something here, and he then explored it, and he found the killer list. That was probably the only one in the last, say, 5 years that I wasn't 100% happy with. But my 2023, like this year's ATC, perfect example. You know, it took me 4 months, and you know, I went down to Uprising. I had the Sam High, and I was literally just trying every single different faction, using tournaments to sharpen and push a archetype as far as it could go before I kind of switched. Now, there's elements here. So, and I'm trying to keep on track here to answer your question, but there's a lot into there's a lot into this process. There's I'm a big believer of that kind of survival of the fittest when I'm developing lists, because remember I don't just like I might take a little bit of inspiration from other. You know, I read Gurnhammer and all that other stuff. I'm very well, you know, read in terms of content. I listen to lots of podcasts and all that stuff. So I get ideas from others, but one of the favorite parts of my, in essence, 40K hobby, in essence, is actually developing lists from scratch and getting it to a point where, you know, I've had people, international people, actually say, you know, hey, I tested out your list. It's really sick. You know, I'm smashing everyone, you know, in my own area. It's really nice to hear that. So the process I go through is, I described it was that kind of survival of the fittest, where you'll kind of come up with probably about 3 archetypes, maybe more, but you'll try different archetypes and you'll push it as far as it can go. And then you see where it ends. And so, like, you know, here's the beginning. It goes along and it gets to about here. And then you stop trying that archetype and you test a completely different archetype. And that kind of switch, it's a pain in the butt, but you have to do it. And you see, oh, that died straight away. There was too many counters. Then you tried a different archetype and it actually goes to here. Now, if you just kept on pushing and got that, its kind of cap is here. Whereas, you know, this archetype, if you don't ever try it, you'll never know about it. But then it goes all the way to the end. You know, it's got like almost no counters, etc. And that process, that, yeah, as I said, that takes me about 4 to 6 months. And it's intentional practice through, and we'll go through some of them, but through doing singles tournaments, doing the smaller team tournaments, you know, seeing how it fits in with pairings, etc. Then at practice, you know, we have a whole bunch of the guys come over at my house or at Eric's and talking about the list. Sometimes in the, you know, Ethos chat, we might do it as well. And just trying to understand what the problems are, what needs to be fit, trying it out. And that kind of testing, in essence, of concepts and testing of archetypes, that's what I focus, in essence, the intentional practice for through list development. And there's 2 phases, in essence, of this. You've got the list development phase, and then you've got the mastering of the list phase. I'll pause there because I've just dumped a whole bunch of info, and I'm sure you have some questions. But yeah, that, in essence, is the structure, in essence, of what I go about. And every 6 months, I do that process, and then I switch. And it might be a little bit more than 6 months, it might be a little bit less, depending on what it is. But that's, in essence, for what I've been doing for the last kind of like 12 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so we'll deep dive that a bit more. So you talked about there, so obviously using Tyranids as an example. Look, brilliant time. A new codex came out, the first one of 10th edition. A balanced data slate, as we are aware, as we're recording this, is like -5 hours away or however far away it is. So when you get a new codex and like you've got a new army summon, like what do you do? Like what's the initial key step? You talked about your archetypes. Do you try and like potentially like draft some ideas or like start doing some linkages? So like for example, with the current like the Tyranid swarm, so the endless swarm archetypes, like look, it's trying to be built around small bugs. Do you try and design a small bug list and say, look, I'll test this out 5 months from now, and right now I want to try the Vanguard one, which is all about lictors and like fast moving stuff which can use lone operative? Or what is your philosophy for that? Like, do you just read it and see well the first thing that catches your eye and like, let's go down that rabbit hole, or what's there?
I mean, I think you've identified. Like, I will be trying all of them. Like there is at minimum, because there's 6 detachments in essence. There is at minimum 5 different archetypes, because we've already in essence been playing this one. Like minimum, like there'll be 5 armies. GW have kind of encouraged a particular archetype, the units that you're going to be using, because they give bonuses to that thing. So yeah, at minimum there's 5 archetypes, and you play those, each one probably, I reckon 3 games is probably what you'd need to do to just get a little bit of a handle over it. You're not going to master it again. There's list development, and then there's mastery of. And it's much more clear cut in some of the bigger events like WTC, what I've just kind of described, because the list development for WTC, it was 4.5 months, 5 months, and then we submitted the list in essence, and then we had 2.5 weeks to just smash out as many games as possible to master that list. So the list development, I've already done in Tyranid, like since I switched, was probably less than a month ago. I've done 2 games with the snakes, like Alex played at the weekend. I did Swarm only, I think, for about 3 games. I did Sean Nathan style big bug list for 2 games. I did the mixed list that I took to the event for 4 games, plus variations, and then the event itself, which is 8 games. So I've only played about 35 games all up with Tyranids, and I've already tried 4 archetypes at least. Like, I also did the double brick Tyranid Warriors with the Prime. Like, that's one of the ones I'm going to be trying as soon as the book drops, Vanguard, and trying that out. I've already played it when it wasn't particularly, it was, I found some of the weaknesses was the slowness, the not being able to fall back when you're like you wrap stuff, but then you're kind of stuck there. And this was a big problem. And then I saw the Vanguard thing. It's like, oh, fantastic. Well, I've already tried the double warrior brick. It was interesting, but it had limitations. Here's a detachment that's going to fix 99% of those problems. Great. I'm going to try that one again. So it's kind of like that. Like, I'm going to be having at least 5 archetypes. I'm going to play a bunch of games with those archetypes, see which one feels the best for me as well. Again, some of these things, they're not pure math answers. Like WTC last year, the pure math answer for Tyranids was like the France, 1,000,001 warriors. But I took just 1 brick of warriors, and I was actually probably happier with just 5-man warrior squad. That's where I found actually it felt the best, was just 5. And I liked having the big units of gargoyles and the Turvagon and things like that. Like, I put that tweak in to make it feel with me, because I personally am not just a pure math player. I'm a dynamic, reasonably aggressive player that likes doing movement tricks and things like that. It's why I play the armies I play.
Yeah, so just extrapolating more on that. So you say you have like a developed almost play style, way you like to play the game. So that sort of dynamic player, have that sort of archetype. How do you sort of explore, I guess, list designs which don't suit your play style, or do you, because you've played so long, you just don't worry about them? For example, the Endless Sword. So obviously, very famously, Eric Lathuris loves the Gaunt Carpet. He loves 200 plus gaunts and plays that very control style. And like that GSC, I mean, it's a bit different, but that 140 neophytes, there's so many bodies on the board, and look, he just swarmed the crap out of you and alpha shot you per se. A bit different, but like so many bodies, so many things. Is that something you'll still try and entertain and play around with and refine just to see if it's good or not? Or are you saying, nah, bugger it, I'm going to cut it because I know I cannot manage 200 plus models on the table?
Yeah. I've actually done that in the past. Like I have played the Swarm again because Eric's lives next door pretty much, and we knew that there are some archetypes that are just the strongest, but you have to be really comfortable in that. I have played it. I've won games with the Swarm or the Carpet, but I'm not particularly strong at that style of gaming, and so I will play it to understand it, but also if I have to play it myself against it. So I know when there was a period of time when I was playing Dark Elder versus Eric when he was playing Carpet, and I probably banged my head against that 7, 8, 9 times, getting it closer and closer and closer and pushing him so then he couldn't just go into this kind of same, robots. Here we go. Yep, I go on and I win the game. So that's the first game. And then I was like, okay, cool. This is how I can improve. And then it's getting him better. But at the same time, anyone who happens to have that type of army, be it, the zombie swarm from Chaos, the plague bearers and stuff like that, it's the same kind of idea. And there are definitely preferences for how I play. That I'm not going to force a particular playstyle, if you know what I mean. The Swarm, even if it's purely objectively the best, I'm not particularly. I don't find it as fun, and I don't get that invested in things that I'm not enjoying, and so therefore I won't put the what's the saying? When someone at work is not, is disengaged, and so they won't put their extra effort.
Extra effort in, or the investment, the time essentially into, or the that makes sense. The extra effort, or just
if someone says, "Hey, you won a game," not really, because I'm not, if I'm not really. Whereas when I love an army, I was like, heck yeah, like I will do hundreds of reps with the same. Like Eric thinks I'm an idiot sometimes because I will put in 100 reps. With I did it in the prep for WTC before that kind of last month. I did almost 100 games before we went over, in like 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. And it's on TTS, it's in person. It doesn't make a difference because I really enjoy that kind of aspect of it. But that's what I mean. I purposely make sure that I enjoy the archetype that I'm playing, the style of army I'm playing, the faction I play, and this is why I only collect the ones I do, because there are a couple outside of my collection that I would be interested in, but I just know myself. I'm not going to get involved in that. I go with my super factions because the general play style of both of them fits how I like playing. I know the type of archetypes that I will get really excited for, and I'll put in the extra effort to put practice in. And that then turns into seeing more and more patterns, because then I actually play against a wide range of factions. I put myself in situations that I can recognize very quickly about what I should do, what the kind of perfect answer is. I used to play competitive chess, when I was younger, and I see lots of similarities. If you see an opening, what the correct opening is. There's like 14 things you can do, and there is like maybe 2 objectively best ways, in essence, of entering this. And I occasionally see a pattern where I was like, I know exactly what to do, because I'll go on TTS. So Tabletop Simulator is also a very useful tool to get intentional practice outside of in person, because something you will save the game state when you start the game, and then you'll play you going first versus you going second with the same deployment. You will also maybe save the game turn 1 or 2. Turn like 2 or 3. Sorry, when there's a pivotal moment, and it's either I could dive you right now, like I've done this with Rory. Rory and I, we played probably about 100 games now on TTS, and we'll save the game, and I'll say, okay, I can dive you right now. I'm not sure because I think you've got enough to beat me back, and then I'll lose, board state. But I want to see what happens, and you go through it. And then if there's like a 4-edge charge that you fail, even with a reroll, you kind of pass it because again, you're doing some intentional practice here. Versus let's hang back and see what the score is. And so I really recommend people, if they haven't already gotten onto TTS that and still find it okay to use, go onto that, because that's where you can do some really intentional practice when you're getting reps as well. So again, I want to make it clear to anyone who's actually paying attention here. There's list development practice and reps in essence, but reps I usually talk for about the practice when you're doing to get army mastery, where you've kind of developed to a point where you say, this is the correct archetype. Now I'm doing tiny tweaks for matchups that I haven't tested against. So like you might know the archetype that is the strongest. Like you've gone through it all. This is the archetype that's here. All right, so let's get that. Here's the core part of the army. Let's now play Tau. Let's play Knights. Let's play this. Let's play that. Work out, let's say, if from a single point of view, what's the gap in essence that I need to fill, and that's where you're doing reps for army mastery and just doing the still tiny tweaks. But the list development stuff, that's a different style of actual the different style of practice, because you're trying to see what actually gels or fits with your own play style versus what the current meta is, etc.
Yeah, sure. A lot to unpack there. It's great though, Simon. It's a lot of great information. Just like a lot to unpack. Like, no, it's fantastic. So you mentioned there before, like a bit a while back, that you play against Eric, and like so obviously when you're playing old school Dark Elder versus Gaunt Carpet, and you're going back and forth, getting reps and reps and reps, and trying to improve. So a couple of questions there. So how do you replicate that sort of tabletop simulator success of having those scenarios in real life for people who do not play tabletop simulator? How do you sort of try and replicate those scenarios? Do you like re-rack the session, like do the same thing of you push and you just re-rack, oh look, I know this failed, or we know what this happens here, let's just re-rack it and go straight back to the original state? Or do you do something different?
No, I mean, intrinsically, you know, like I know you've done this before. You've been playing competitive 40K for a while. It's people know this. It's just you deploy, you take a photo of it. You generally know what the deployment is, you know, the positioning, etc. You play out a turn. You say, all right, I go first. I'll play 2 turns out, see how it feels. We'll re-rack, play 2 turns, and then whichever one feels better, you can even take a photo and kind of just set up that board state and then push from there. If there's something really weird that happened, like, you know, you rolled 16, you know, 4-up invos and you passed 15 out of 16, that can happen. But if you're really trying to test it, it's like, okay, if I don't roll that, you know, that many saves, then I don't win this game. And you know, I mean, like, you be honest with yourself. That's what I mean. Like, you need to set up. One of the things I'm always there. Something I kind of drill into myself is you go into a tournament or you go into a game with a clear state of mind of what you're trying to achieve in that process. If you go into every single game or every single tournament saying, I'm going to win this game or I'm going to win this event, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Because if you don't win, then you failed. Whereas if you have the growth mindset where even at tournaments, I'm just learning, I'm talking to myself, I'm saying, yep, cool, I'm not going to do that one again, etc., etc. Because I'm always like, there's only 2 big events that I care about where I'm not so much doing the growth mindset, I'm doing now I actually have to deliver, which is ATC and WTC. Everything else to me nowadays is, like, for the last, say, 5 years, is just pure practice. I could be at Uprising, you know, playing for first, and I'm using it to gather data for WTC or ATC, because, you know, I've set, when I go into these events, I already have saying I'm going to learn as much as possible for this archetype. I'm going to push this archetype as much as possible. I rarely go into especially a singles event, where if I have been playing this singles event list for the last 6 months and I developed it just for this event and I'm going to smash everybody. That almost never happens nowadays for me. I think the last one I did that was LVO 2020. Like, I practiced for that for about 4 months, like developing that list. And that was my last event for 8th edition. Did really well, got 5-1, 23rd, played on the stream, all that fun stuff. But it's a different mentality, singles compared to teams. And once you start getting into the teams mentality, you're just pushing archetypes in singles. You're not looking for results. And again, I'll cover this in a separate podcast because, again, it's a whole thing. But I saw Michael, hey, mate, you in our game, so I played him at TNAO this weekend, and in the singles mindset, your first and second mindset is nothing to do with what's the most important thing in teams. So first is I got to win the game, and second, I got to get as close as possible to 100. The third is, I guess, I should probably not let them get to 100. Whereas in teams, the most important thing is differential. You win or lose, it makes no difference. Differential is the number one thing. Number two is then win, and number three is then your own score. But differential is number one. And it's so hard when you're playing in teams in terms of your mindset to get accurate data in singles, because you play differently in singles. You actively do. Like, there was a situation in our game with Michael that, and again, I don't want to dig too much because there's a whole episode here, but he could have pushed and made my score like 50, but then it would have maybe made him not get 100. It maybe got him 90, so it keeps a big differential, but he didn't get then 100. And in singles, all you want to do is get to as close as possible to 100 because you need the break points later on. And so he just hanged out. He didn't, kick me while I was down, and he let me get my 85 in essence because he didn't want to have the potential to lose any points. He knew he had won the game, and he's just like, I'm just going to camp here. You need to try and come to me, and then you'll lose the game, and you've already lost. I don't care if you score your whatever. I'm not pushing just to keep our differential down. So, it's a different mindset. You can't go into singles events saying I'm doing intentional practice for teams, because it doesn't work like that. You're doing intentional practice for archetypes. You're not doing intentional practice for teams.
Yeah, sure. That makes complete sense. And so just to harp back on that, we talk about archetypes. So something to know, as well as yourself, though, Dean Simback of Blog for the Blood God. I have to say that so slowly so I get it right, because it's always the inverse I say it. But he's often renowned, so people don't know, so very Chaos Space Marine, World Eaters, Demons, all things Chaos, loves them, absolutely loves them, but very Khorne, World Eater centric. And what's something he does, and I really admire, is to each event, he'll always try a different subtraction. So in 9th edition, he tried Alpha Legion, he tried Creations of Bile, he tried Red Corsair, so he tried all of them. And for each event, he would just try them all and just explore each of those subfactions. I guess, so to type back to you and ask the question, how do you sort of balance exploring this archetype with, I guess, the results and stuff like that? Do you I guess you sort of answer the question like, look, for WTC and AZTC, I'll take the strongest thing no matter what, and then every other event, you'll just sort of test whatever archetypes up there on the testing table at the time? Is that basically the answer to it, or does it vary? Or do you, maybe I've gone about a wrong question, but is that sort of how your philosophy works? Like, you'll just go down a list and it's like, look, if I'm playing an event now and this is the archetype, I'm playing this archetype, or will you change things up?
I'll just do a quick big zoom out view answer, and then I'll answer that one specifically. So the zoom out view is I purposely, just for my own, and I did a whole episode on this about, I think it's called Switching to Win or something like that. I can't remember what fun name I called it, but it was Switching While on Top, I think that was called. Anyway, it's about changing armies and factions and all that type of stuff, and like play styles every 6 months in essence, or if you've got a big event, in every 8 months, but generally at least once to twice a year you're going to be playing completely different factions, not completely different play styles, because there are crossover, but different factions, even when you're smashing it, because it drives me to not be complacent, to really go through that process. Because remember what I said, once you actually get onto a faction, you've got archetypes. You've got to switch between archetypes, and that feels in essence like switching armies. And because I do whole collections, I don't feel it bad because switching armies just means I'm now using this chunk of my army compared, this chunk of my collection compared to this chunk. And this is why I recommend people to focus on collections, not, army specifically. Because if you just got an army, then you're going to really stick, and you're not going to explore archetypes and see which is the best. Whereas if you're going through your collections and going through a million different archetypes, then it's just you using more of your own models, and it's like you actually feel happy about doing it. But that process of you went to a 2-dayer, you actually won the event. You think, yep, awesome, this is my thing. 3 months time, ATC is coming. This is what I'm playing. You might have a blind spot because you're not going through this process of intentional kind of killing and then growing again, etc. You might have a blind spot that the absolute best list is just one more archetype away from testing because you've already found it. You've already got success. And that's what I mean. Like, I go through this process intentionally where I'll do whole faction changes, but then that kind of process of becoming a beginner and growing and becoming a beginner and growing, I'll do 5, 6, 7, 10 times if necessary within a faction with these archetypes. And I personally really encourage that process. Now, for the actual, please correct me if I'm wrong with the question, the archetype testing, in a sense, and you're gonna have to just remind me again exactly what the question is. I want to answer.
You're right. So I just want to confirm. So, like, I guess you alluded to, so with WTC and like the big events like NZ Team Champs, like you'll take the strongest list of that archetype at the time. So, thinking to, I guess, maybe Elder at the time right now. So, Wraith Knight and stuff like that, you'll take the strongest version of that. You wouldn't take the skew archetype build or whatever in a team setting you view as the strongest version.
Yeah.
Whereas for each event,
I remember the answer to your question. Yeah, so I will actually map out a couple of archetypes that I like. I'll sit down in front of a book and I'll just write whatever's obvious, and then there's really unobvious things. So, as I said, for Tyranids, even Index Tyranids, there's 4 to 5 reasonably obvious lists. I mean, I've been playing 26 years, so it's not like I'm from scratch, and I've developed lists from scratch many times. So I know some of the things to look at, and then this is where the kind of Ethos chat can help with, or even the just the going to Eric's an hour or so earlier than everyone else getting there, and just kind of digging through some of the ideas. And I'll actually write down a bunch of lists, but also a bunch of ideas. And then I'll spend maybe 2 weeks on list number 1 or archetype number 1. But I've still got 4 archetypes to go. And exactly what you suggested. It's when I'm doing the list development stage, I will just, whatever archetype I'm playing, well, then that's what I'm taking to that event or that practice weekend or whatever. And I'll just go through the thing. So the actual killer list, I might not be there because I'm still on, archetype 2, and archetype 6 is the one that, is the killer. I will get there. And that's why I say the process is, 4 to 6 months. I will get there. And as soon as I find it, I know what I'm feeling like. I've done it enough that I know what it feels like when I know I'm on a killer list, killer archetype. And then as soon as I find it, and I'll try enough, and I think I've played at least every single model in a book. So the Elder one was a perfect example. Like, I did Sam Hyde, I did Baltan, I even did Alatok for one game. I did the custom ones, like I did lots of different custom ones, and then I came to the one that I actually took to ATC, which is the double master one. It's the better Psyker and better ignore cover. And I said, yep, this is the archetype. This is the strongest faction or archetype that I've got. These are the kind of units I want to run. And then I was making tiny tweaks on, between games to make it perfect. That was like, that archetype was probably the 7th kind of archetype I had built through. And even after I did that, I still went one more. And I said, oh, this is nowhere near as good as this one. And I kind of went back and I was like, yep, cool. This is it.
Yeah, so that's great, fantastic. So I guess just to deep dive a bit more of the archetype section. So you have an archetype, and obviously you play around with units, and you see you'll test almost every unit in the codex, obviously within certain parameters. Like when you're playing an endless swarm Tyranid army, you're generally not going to play too many big bugs, because the way the detachment and the way the rules work, you're incentivized to play small bugs. So noting that aside, how will you change your list between, like, within that same archetype? How will you change? Is it generally you're like, look, I love this 500 points, like this unit works, I know it works, I'll switch it out for something else? Or how would you sort of refine and test things out? Because that's it. Oh, yeah. How would you refine and test things out? Like, what is your process for that?
I sometimes it's not as clear cut. Like the swarm one, like for Tyranids, it's obvious, right? If when the only thing that buffs the swarms are the swarms, then taking Carnifex spam is not a winning combo. You know, like there are some things that are obvious, but something like, again, I haven't done a deep dive into it. I'll be doing this over the next few weeks and next 3 to 6 months. But take something like Vanguard, right? So the whole army can fall back and charge. So this is the Vanguard swarm detachment thing, right?
Yeah. Vanguard and played up for the new tuning codex. So people who are unaware, certain units get the special keyword, so everything can fall back and charge, and then some things can do something else, and you get stratagems.
Yes. Certain anything with wings or anything that's kind of sneaky gets advance and charge, but the whole army gets fall back and charge. So the obvious one there is, you take sneaky things. Maybe you take some warriors, again, going back to the warrior one, because the warrior prime, it gets the Vanguard keyword, so now your big bricks of warriors can fall back, advance and fall back and charge. And that's reasonably obvious. And so there's different things you can play around there. But in that same faction, like same detachment in essence, what if you go big bugs and you went Carnifex spam, or you went Horospex? Like the Horospex might be better in the Crusher Stampede or in the Feeder one. Like that's also a really interesting one that I'm keen to explore. But what happens if you go Horospex in the Vanguard? It doesn't get any benefits of the keyword, but it does get the fallback and charge. And one of the things that I've noticed with the Horospex, I've only run it for one game, but once it gets in there, if it bounces, it kind of just sits there. But imagine if you could then fall back and then shoot off and do something else. Like that's what I mean. Like it's not, most of the time, it's not as clear cut as this buffs little bugs, and so you take little bugs. Sometimes it's this buffs this really clearly, but also side buffs this thing, and this side buff is actually better with kind of this support than this thing that's really obvious. And that's the bit when you kind of understand what an archetype is, to then start exploring things in that archetype to see if there's something else that you're missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So it's like playing around with different things. So, like, for example, version 1 may have all these units, and then version 2 may have some of those units, and then replace this with this. And version 3 may have some of those units removed, and then you add some stuff in. So, I guess from the sound of things, you'll just change things around, like get a whole, like, a philosophical picture per se, or how it interacts as a whole. Like some things you'll love, some things you won't love, and go from there. Because, so I don't know to harp back a bit, but you were talking previously about GSC. So, last ANZ Teams Championship, I know from memory, the custom cult, you knew something was there because you said the bikes felt very, very good. Like there was something there at the 30 bikes in GSC, which felt amazing, which eventually was part of the winning formula for the list. But it required a bit of refinement. But you were able to identify, look, this key component is amazing. We just got to figure out the rest. So that's fantastic.
And I said it on the weekend a bunch of times because people were asking me for feedback. There was one of my Tau opponents, he was saying that, and so I said, look, I don't have a lot of experience playing Tau. I just play against them, and I hate those stupid goat people. But the thing that I usually rely on, and it's been pretty damn good, is when things annoy me. Whatever annoys me is usually good. And the more it annoys me, the better it usually is. Wraith Knight, when I was playing Dark Elder in the beginning of this edition, absolutely pissed me off to absolute no end. So obviously running 3 was the correct choice. It's like, the Yakan, is... I was going to start doing some insults, but let's just say the Yakan is a terrible thing and it shouldn't exist. And so therefore having the Yakan in an Elder list is the correct choice. You get the idea. So, Ghost Keelers. I played against one of them, and it annoyed me to no end. So I recommend my opponent play 3. It's, like, yeah.
So winning formula. So it's funny you mentioned that. So back in the day of 9th edition, Ages of Vect, and like most armies now have like an Ages of Vect equivalent. So increased the strategy removal 1 CP. But the old winning formula I heard like from Anthony Fidel, so Tony V, was the first thing that pisses you off and annoys you, just Vect that thing. And like obviously in the day of index hammer and stuff like that, like you probably refine it a bit more, but it's a pretty good statement. But the thing that annoys you the most, probably just neuter it and just get it out of your way. So that's a funny you mentioned there. The first thing that annoys you, the things that annoy you, is something to pick up on and hate essentially. So we referred to before. So as we're recording this is the eve of the data slate, and obviously the eve of actually also 2 days before the 2 new codex is officially released. So my question is, so after a balance patch or a data slate, or like even like a new edition sort of drop per se, or obviously bigger, but how will you actually readjust your practice, and what's like your thought process from there? So you get a big new update. How does your practice, or how does your, I guess, behind the scenes stuff change? Do you just go through it all and start testing some stuff out, or what do you do?
I think I just do my process. Like my process has been my process, as I said, for like I've vocalized it the first time when I did that kind of training. It was like 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember when I actually released that. And it all depends on how quickly that big event that I'm going to, like, again, this is why I say I take a step back to everything. I structure my hobby, in essence, based off some key deliverables. If we were to talk project management, I'll talk your language, baby. So, where's the key drop? The key drop is ATC and WTC, assuming I do both next year, which may be on the cards. So right now I have nothing that I'm playing for specifically. So the big event has just happened. We've got a couple more from Gladiator Gaming later this year, but again, I'll be just using that. Whatever archetype I'm playing, that's what I'm taking. Like, I'm not playing for anything right at this second for pretty much the next 6 months, right? So I don't need to smash out 50 games tomorrow, because I'm like, if this is why I was almost happy that I wasn't part of this year's WTC, even though it's always, you get a lot of FOMO when, especially you've been part of it for a while, but smashing out and put that kind of pressure on me. I just know for me, I have to put in that time and those reps to feel like I have, I'm at the sharpest I can be for the team, because I hate letting people down, in a sense. And trying to smash out a 6 month or 4 month program. I think the 4 months has been the shortest. Like in my mind, it's a 4 month program in 2.5 weeks. It's something that I don't thrive at. Let's just say. It's not to say I can't do it, but I do not thrive at that exact thing. I need the time. I need the thinking time as well, because especially between games, you have to be really introspective if you've got the growth mindset. Remember, that was one of the key things. And so I will think about most of my games for days and just think about, like, what was it? What part of the archetype? Is there a weakness in this archetype that, I lost that game or I won that game? It makes no difference. Was there something that's inherently weak about that archetype? And even if you win 5 or 6 games in a row, but it's on a certain style, like, you can kill marine bodies, but you cannot kill any knights. Maybe that archetype, it's good, but it's just not good enough, in essence. And you'll think about that. You might only play 3 or 4 games in a week, but you'll be thinking about it in your off times. And then you'll say that I just don't feel really good. Like, that person had 1 Land Raider in their army, and that was it. I stuck on this fucking Land Raider. What happens if they have, 2 big knights that can actually punch me in combat? All right, well, now I just lose. Yeah, so I need a little bit of that kind of runway, or whatever you want to call it. I need that time to prep. So from Codex dropping, I probably won't even get a game in until... I think my first game might be like a week later. That way I can kind of see it, write out a bunch of archetype lists, in essence, or just say general archetypes I can see, think about lists, just ponder them for a bit, I'll pick one of the archetypes that interests me. I'll probably do the Vanguard one because I already have an army that I liked but didn't really fit perfectly. That's the double warrior brick. I want to try it out in Vanguard. So that will be probably my first game about a week after it all drops. And then I'll just test that archetype for a while, maybe 2 weeks. And generally it's like 1 to 2 weeks. I'll get a very good feeling after it's, when I say 1 to 2 weeks, it's because it's like 3 games. And on average, when I'm not playing like crazy amount, I'm just doing 3 games a week. That's my average, is about 2 to 3 games a week, generally 3. And I'll do a week, 3 games, and think during that week. And I'll know if there's something there or not. And then if there is something there, I'll do another week. So another 3, say, games, or maybe a small event. And then I'll pause that and I'll switch archetype. And again, that might be the best archetype, but I don't know. It's more, I just need to keep testing out the archetypes. And until I test at least 3 archetypes, there is no way you can feel like you've actually explored stuff. And Tyranids, because there's 6 different, sub-factions. We've already played one. So this one sub-faction, right, the whatever the base one is, Invasion Fleet, it has at least 4 armies that are good, right? So one Invasion Fleet has 4 armies that can be run in it. Now, one of those armies might be better, so the Sean Nathan style list might be better, say, in Crusher Stampede or whatever. So maybe that naturally fits in. But I'm predicting, outside of, say, the little Gribbly one, 2 to 3 armies can be theoretically okay. And there might be some duplicates, but in any one of them. Like what I ran on the weekend, I had 3 units of 2 Pyrovores, put in some Ripper Swarms. Now I could take that same list that I took in the Invasion Fleet in the Digestive Fleet, whatever the hell it's called. Like maybe it works 100 times better there. And then maybe I actually put in a Horospex or 2 instead of, say, the Tyrannofex, because it's nerfed a little bit. And now the army plays a bit differently. But now they're putting Tyrannofexes in, maybe it fits better in the Invasion Fleet. You know what I mean? Like, this is the exploration. This is the process. And this is why, you play 3 games over a week, you think about it, then you switch and you switch and you switch and switch, and you eventually go through all the different archetypes. You work out which one you think is the strongest. And then you explore that one again for a bunch of games. And then eventually you do your list submission, and then it's like, master this list.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think you mentioned that, like, you leave something like at the very end. So, for example, like, the list is almost there, but I'm missing something. And now, like, with the new codex, maybe like, look, the neuro that fixes that issue I had before into this matchup or in this situation, which I'm trying to engineer. So it's just fantastic. So we get into we got some listener questions before we wrap things up. So before we get into that, so has there been any practice philosophies or things you've tried to do in the past that haven't worked for you, or things that you maybe want to try in the future? Because obviously right now you're doing a 6-month process and you have like these, I guess, almost use project management terms. You've got agile and you got your sprints. Look at us. Look at the project management talk. You got some sprints and sort of stuff like that to try and do some things and have like a deliverable per se. But have you tried anything else or something different that maybe just hasn't worked for you, or you've seen other people implement? Like, look, I mean, famous players like Hayden or Eric, do they try and do something different that you've tried to incorporate that doesn't work for you?
I think the one thing I have seen that doesn't work is actually 2 things. One, it's forcing someone to play an archetype that doesn't gel with them. Kind of like, and we learnt this early on here in Queensland, and maybe a bit earlier than some of the other states, because I know that I think I talked to you about this maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where there were some lists that were kind of written or that you knew were good and you gave to your players. I don't know if it was exactly like that, but there was some of the teams were like had good lists given to them and saying, here, this is the best, play this. And then they had to kind of learn it, but it wasn't theirs. And so they didn't feel ownership over it, etc. So we don't do that. Like we generally, like Eric might, or myself, or like any of us, more seasoned players might suggest to players interesting ideas. And I mean, Eric does that to me, and I occasionally do it to Eric as well. We'll suggest ideas, but they have to make it their own. So we don't write lists and say, here, play this. And as much as Liam doesn't want to say it, that does happen occasionally with Eric. He's like, Eric, this is the best list says that to Liam, and Liam goes, oh, fuck you. The other thing that we don't do is and I said it before, the swarm, right? My play style, even if the swarm would be objectively the best, it's not going to be forced upon me. If you know what I mean, like that's what I mean. Like it has to still match your play style, and if the army archetype that matches your play style of that faction isn't the strongest, if say this archetype is stronger but it doesn't match your playstyle and you're not as good of it, whereas this archetype is your favorite but it's not as good as say this one, then maybe a faction swap is actually better than sticking with that one. You know what I mean? Like that's where we kill off our baby, so to speak, and we switch then to a different faction that the playstyle is more aligned to your playstyle, but the archetype is back to where we want it to. So they're kind of the two big ones. It's not forcing someone to do a play style that doesn't gel with them, because again, they won't have that ownership of the thing. They won't put in the extra practice, etc. But then also not just saying, here's a list, play this. It's usually, here's a list or a list idea. You make it your own. Do your own version of that kind of process. I don't think anyone's as kind of maybe systematic as I am, possibly even in Australia, but at least here in Brisbane that I know of. But they own it. Usually it's no, this is I have created it.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. It's great advice to people. So take it or leave it. Like that's good to know for at least that doesn't work for you and hasn't worked in the Queensland community, but may work for someone else. So look, some people it's very common to net list, and some people pick it up and run with it perfectly, and others don't. But that's good to know and understand for that. So
I would make it clear. Sorry, just on that, the net listing. Right. People say net listing is a bad idea. Sorry, as almost like an insult. As I said, I read Goonhammer. I look at results on BCP and all that. Like I look at people's lists to get inspiration. There's nothing wrong with getting inspiration. Musicians do it, artists do it. It's you listen, you get inspired, and then you make something your own. That's my point. It's not about just going, I'm copying, pasting, and I'm going to be an automaton, because you don't know why that list is good or not. You'll just run it, but you'll never get, even if the archetype's the best, you'll never get to the same level as the creator in essence. Whereas if you take an idea, you get inspired, and then you make it your own by, even if it's just changing, say 200-300 points, that's you understand enough then about what was missing in the main bit of the army to make your local meta or the thing that you're trying to achieve with it yours, and you're going to be again more invested in it, etc.
No, that's fantastic, and I think it's great to, as you said, get an initial idea, maybe see what works for others, then iterate on top of it. So yeah, I've done it myself, and it sounds like you've done it as well. So that's great to hear. So the questions we have from people in the Down to 40K Discord. So starting firstly with Alex the Greek. So what's the main? Highlight for you. So what's the main thing that's kept you in the hobby after all these years? And then we've got a follow-on question. So talking about the community edition compared to previous edition. So, but starting firstly, so what's the main thing that's kept you in this hobby for all these years? So you said you played for 26 years, which I hate to put it to you, I'm sure is maybe longer than some people are age-wise in this community. So, like, what's kept you in this hobby all this time? And then how do you feel about the community in addition in comparison to previous periods of time? Is it positive, negative? Because overall 10th edition can be skewed as quite negative compared to maybe 9th edition for some people.
Mm-hmm. I would suggest it's the people. Like what I've definitely played more games of, say, 9th ed than I have of any other edition. And I've played more games since coming back competitively and getting closer and closer and kind of expanding my circle of friends in essence within 40K. And that's again kind of going back to what we're talking about with the team. It's they kind of drive you. And then when you're part of a team event, being part of that team drives you to do your best, because you will play extra games because you don't want to let your team down. You will go to, a weekend or just, going over to a mate's place to play a game or two because there's a bit of that social pressure. Whereas when you're not part of, or you don't have friends or close friends, or not part of a group of friends who this is your activity, there's less likely for you to drive yourself, in essence, to push yourself, to maintain it. You know, you'll find excuses to not, in essence, play games. So it's the people, the community. I think that's probably the main thing. I have talked a bit about it in one of my episodes, that the game itself I enjoy, and the best bit about it that I enjoy is not so much the hobbying or anything like that. It's actually the problem solving, be it the problem solving when developing lists, you know, trying to find that killer list, or the problem solving when you're on the tabletop and it's like, here's a board state, you know, mate in 3. You know, you're trying to actually work out how to win in a certain board state, or how to preserve points or things like that. So I love that side of it, the problem solving part of it. But you can get problem solving anywhere. Like play lots of pretty much any video game that's deep enough and it has some sort of problem solving. You know, you can play chess against the AI. There's problem solving. You know, there's a million ways to get problem solving. 40K is a very social game, and for that, you know, 2 to 3 hours that you're either in face to face or on Discord with someone playing on TTS, that is your world in essence, and you get sucked into that world, and you're chitting, chattering, and that's why that kind of community part of 40K is so encouraged, because this is not a Dota 2 style where you go in, you smash someone in 20 minutes and you hurl expletives to each other. I mean, that can happen, but it's not that common.
It's very, very uncommon in the 40K community. But yeah, I know yourself, you used to play a bunch of Hearthstone, I don't know if you still do. And then recently I've been playing Marvel Snap. It's like that sort of, it's a different thing, a different sort of problem solving, but it's unique to sort of test your mind and do other things. But we come back to 40K for the social aspect of the community. So what do you, so just to answer that second question, so how do you feel the community edition is currently compared to previous editions? Do you love it, you hate it, or do you think it's the best it's ever been?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't, if the community was toxic, I wouldn't be part of it. This edition, I've seen some of my friends who kind of skipped most of 9th, just because of life. Just because of life, that they've come back because of 10th. I don't know if it was because of 10th or they were using 10th as the excuse to get back. They always wanted to, but there was near the end of 9th, there was a huge barrier to entry to get in. Like you needed, 17 books, plus, 47 FAQs to play an army. Like for someone who'd been living 9th for, ever and playing at the highest level, it was fantastic because you could actually have a lot of skill expression. Whereas someone new, it was daunting. They wanted to get back in, but they were kind of using 10th as the excuse to get back in. The community at the moment, especially Southeast Queensland, is absolutely mint. Yeah,
sure. That's awesome. So thanks for that.
And now we have you here as well. So it's only getting better.
No, only go. No, it's great. It's been great to be part of. Unfortunately, I moved out to Toowoomba, so it's like an hour and a half away, but like it's still part of the community. I always make the effort to come back in. So I'm very, very keen to get more and more involved. So another question we have, so from Benny Brown, so he's talking a bit of shit, but like, what was it like to get beaten by so many New South Wales boys at the weekend, referring to the TNA Open? So it sounds like the New South Wales, so it's big of a state rivalry for people who don't know. Like, what was it like being beaten, or you didn't care?
Look, I love it. I love seeing people travel to interstate events. I did, like, last year was a huge travel year for me. I think I went to 6 interstate events, and then I went over, to Belgium for WTC. This year, I've done just the one, the Uprising this in January, and then I've done no traveling for 40K this year. I've missed a bit of it, but I took a little bit of, a step back, we'll say, from that. I encourage anyone who can, both time and money, to travel. You meet, like there's tons of people around Australia who are fantastic, and both as people as well as players in 40K. So if you can travel. Personally, it's always great seeing people actually, getting to Brisbane. And yeah, as I've said it, a couple of times, but yeah, it's the steel sharpens steel is not just inter-club rivalry within the thing. It's I take that whole of Australia look, and I was doing this back in 2017 and prep for the 2018 thing. I was trying to professionalize the Australian players so that when we went over to Europe, we were actually taking not just the best players that we could, but also they were aligned, like they'd had the same, at least year of practice on the same type of games with the same type of levels. And that's the only thing that we've gotten better and better and better at is exactly that. So if you're getting practice games, say here in Brisbane, let's pretend they're slightly better than practice games down in Sydney, but it's only like 2% better because we've got absolute gun players down there, Newcastle and Sydney, etc. And the same thing is in Melbourne. And the ATC, that's why I love ATC, is like ATC helps, push all the states up. But then when you do the traveling interstate, it's when I say we, Australia, all get better. So when we then take over a team to Australia, we're united, and there's no one feels like that they're the weak link personally, but or a group of players saying, oh, these guys haven't done anywhere near enough practice. So they're, you know what I mean? Like you don't want that feeling in a team. So I love it. Everyone should come up to Brisbane and beat us all day long. That only drives us to be stronger.
Nah, that's awesome. And then maybe Simon will come to an event. I know last year you took over Netherlands with one GT after WTC, so I'm sure you're more than willing to take over more events in the future. But as we like to wrap things up, so Simon, any final plugs or shout outs you want to refer to, or any last tidbits you want to talk about for the wonderful listeners?
No. Just Godhammer Gaming. That kind of there's a backlog of events and training stuff that I did on that old channel. The new channel and the new club is Ethos. When I say new, it's been running for at least 3 years now. We do a podcast. We're on a little bit of a break just now, but the event that just happened has spurned some more ideas. So I'll be recording probably next week, the first one back for about a month. So Ethos Australia 40K podcast, I think that's what's called. But just Ethos on Facebook, or I'm sure Sam will have a million links that you can get to us. If you want to see or hear anything that we've got, our club does everything from commission painting of like whole armies to general advice as part of this. We do some elements of coaching. I know Eric outside of Ethos also does his own thing with the Alien Majesty, and he's doing that internationally as well with some players from Poland and I think it's Scotland. It might be America. I don't know. It's that's Eric's thing. He's doing awesome things there. We're all doing, like, we're all a collective of like-minded individuals within the Ethos, but we're also all kind of doing our own things, and we've got like a home base that, I don't know, almost like a consultant style. We've got a hub, but we also have our own fingers in different pies.
Well, yeah, fantastic. And look, all that content is available for your consumption, and I'd highly recommend it. So I know back in the past, I went back and watched some of the Godhammer stuff. So and looked like what sort of the prep was, and I'll definitely after this chat be going back and listening to the philosophical talks with Simon T, and I don't know, listen to like an audiobook, right? Or like any other podcast, right? So I know,
as I say, my team, mini TED Talks.
Mini TED Talks, there we go. We love it. So I know, like earlier this year, so the Best General was like a podcast I'd heard about was very good with Adam Abramowitz, but unfortunately when I got into competitive 40K, it was unavailable. I went back and listened to it now, and yes, even though the content is all 8th edition stuff, and some of the actual little insect army stuff is not relevant, just the whole philosophy and the process was amazingly relevant, and it's very interesting. So highly recommend that. So no, thank you very much for your time, Simon. Really, really appreciate it. I feel like we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure I'll go back and listen to Ethos and listen to more future ramblings and future talks, and we'll just have to get you back on again, hear more stuff. So really, really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for listening. Have a good night. Take care, everyone, and hopefully the Balanced Star Slate is kind to you all, except for Eldar. Eldar can die in a hole for a little bit.
I agree.
Take it. Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good one.